So I did come in 2007 to work here in Oxford on obesity emergence with a medical anthropologist, having had a medical and biomedical background. And I'm going to talk a bit about that research today, and also a bit about the research we've been doing since then, plus a few reflections from my time working in government since June last year. So we'll see how I go. So obesity is a problem of malnutrition. Of all of the malnutrition indicators in the world, obesity is what we've done worst on globally so far. There have been no successful countries who have been successful in reducing obesity to date anywhere. What I'm going to talk about today is suggest that not only obesity emergence, but also addressing it as a problem of culture. Obesity is important because it's linked to a whole range of social and health and economic outcomes, which are extremely damaging and extremely distressing. And I experienced a number of these when I worked in Nauru, which was at the time the world's fattest nation. And these kind of devastating impacts refract through communities in all sorts of ways. I'm going to talk about culture. Culture is shared values, beliefs, and assumptions that shape the way we see the world. We all have culture, and that's okay. And when we challenge it, people get really uncomfortable. And it's easier to see culture in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. So something that anthropologists do quite often is to go and work in countries different to our own. That not only gives us a lens on what happens in other parts of the world, but it also allows us to reflect in different ways on our own culture, and that's what I'm doing more today. It's a lot about what people do, just not just what they say, that's important. And I'm going to tell you today briefly why I think culture underpins the changing lifestyles that are linked to obesity emergence, as well as obesity research, governance, and public responses to obesity governance. And all of these things can contribute to the ongoing problem that we face and potentially contribute to why we haven't addressed obesity so far. This is Nauru. This is the lifestyle change that people have experienced in Nauru over the past 100 years. Now, over the time obesity emerged in the country, all sorts of changes happened. And so far in research, we've only focused on what people eat and the exercise they do. But look at, even in these photographs, you can see the kind of change we've seen happen. When it comes to addressing obesity and addressing fatness, across the last 100 years, we've had a lot of focus on unusual exercise, changing in the mode of living, dieting. We've framed obesity as overindulgence. This idea of temptation comes in. And even in 1995, we were asking, is obesity about gluttony or sloth? So it's not only diet or exercise, but these very deep moral values. And this refracts into the more recent models of obesity. This is a great one from the UK in 2007. Over 200 experts informed this model, and we still see this diet and exercise energy balance, this idea that food and exercise are at the core of this problem, sitting at the center of this very complex model. Now, all of this, despite the fact that there is no proof for the causal role of energy imbalance, diet and exercise, for the development of obesity at the population level. There's no proof. So these cultural assumptions start to underpin how we address population level obesity and the trends that we see. We also see culture and cultural assumptions in how we govern obesity. So in governance, we often think of governing obesity as telling a bunch of individuals what they should do. Individual behavior, of course, is at the heart of obesity emergence, and individuals who are irresponsible are kind of flattening government and populations one step at a time. However, in this world of individual consumption that we kind of think about in political terms, 1.9 individuals do exactly the same thing every day in terms of consuming things like Coca-Cola. That's not individual choice, that's social patterning and that's cultural patterning. And these kind of ideas of individual choice, they're not new. I mean, they're not new, but they're not old. I mean, in politics, we see individual choice tracing back to people like Margaret Thatcher, who very famously said there is no such thing as society. The main focus should be on individuals. It's a political decision, and it's a cultural decision to focus on individuals or societies. When it comes to responding to obesity governance, we also think in very culturally patterned ways. So in Australia, for example, we think of things like taxes on sugar as nannying, as the state telling us what to do, as something that we get very upset and passionate about. Our culture, our very kind of personality of who we are is being challenged, and it's very affronting. But in different parts of the world, the taxes that have been introduced have been framed in very different ways and understood in very different ways. This is the tax that was introduced in Mexico in 2013. These are the kind of posters that accompanied it. And the tax was framed as something, a tool that the government was using to level the playing field and protect the citizens against these evil soda lobbyists that were infiltrating. Now, in practice, what that means when we're addressing obesity in Australia is we're doing stuff like this. But when we look at what people do, rather than what people say, people are consuming things because it makes them a part of society, because it's convenient, because it's value for money, or because it leads them to aspirational goals and possibilities. And these things are all cultural. So, if obesity is a culture problem, what do we do from here? Why does this matter? And for me, this matters because if obesity is a cultural problem, we can't address it using medicine and science alone. And it can't necessarily be addressed by the health department, which is where it currently sits from a policy perspective. Things like humanities and the arts and culture can start to expose our cultural assumptions in different ways. We can use humour to challenge culture, to challenge these deep-seated beliefs. And using humour is a great way of challenging people in a way that's less uncomfortable. You can have the slides later to read this one properly, but I wanted to include it just to... We can also use very sobering reminders of what our current situation is and what our future might look like. This is from a photography exhibition in Melbourne not long ago, reflecting our own culture and our cultural ideals back at us. The kind of decisions we make in government also look like this. Humanities and the arts can also help us think about the future and imagine what the future might look like. Policy is often very reactive, but we can also start to say, well, if we make these kind of decisions, where do we want to end up as a community and as a country? What kind of culture do we want to value? And what do we want our society to look like? This is Wally, this is what the society looked like there, and everyone seemed pretty happy. And I suppose the take-home message for me is that science can tell you how to clone a T-Rex, but thinking about some of these cultural problems can also be really important. And at the moment, we're not there when it comes to governance. And so since I've been working in the government, there has been a very strong focus on randomised control trials and on addressing problems that arise. Collecting data is very important, but none of these things can really tap into culture. Understanding what people do can't be studied using surveys and using these kind of data collection tools. And we also can't build a future together by studying numbers. So having some of those conversations about culture is really important. How do we do that? The question probably remains for today and tomorrow. Thank you.